Northwest home for paranormal. You're listening to U.S. Phenomenon with your host, Mario Magana.
From the Pacific Northwest in the shadow of the 1962 World's Fair, the Space Needle. Good evening. I am your host, Mario Magana. This is U.S. Phenomenon. Welcome to another episode of U.S. Phenomenon as we are just days away from the election. The state of Washington, as we'll call this podcast, this episode, for those who are listening to us on terrestrial radio, I'm telling you, you got to get the exclusive. Make sure you go to my website, onairmario.com, to subscribe to the podcast so you can hear the entire interview. Tonight, our guest needs no introduction. You can find him all over social media, terrestrial radio stations, running up amok across the country, trying to chase down all types of, what would we say, these evangelical megachurch priest. It is our good friend and Photog Steve 81. Steve, welcome back to U.S. Phenomenon, man.
Thank you for having me back.
Okay, Steve. So the state of Washington, as we know, the election is just days away. I know that you've been working on some really hot stories the last couple months, and I know we haven't had you on for a while, but what's interesting to me right now is that there's so much going on within the state of Washington, crimes. I know that you've done some traveling for some documentaries that you've been working on, which is quite interesting to me because I tongue in cheek, I mean, there's a lot of believers out here, but it's so funny to me when you see these mega churches that are like, if you're not a Christ subscriber or follower and you're not digging deep down, and these mega church preachers are saying, it's so cheap for me to buy these airplanes. It is just so sad. Steve, I know you're working on so many stories. What's been something that you've been working on that you just been having fun with?
Yeah, the one you've just been talking about, it's been a big one. It's consumed a lot of my time. I'm actually going back in a couple of weeks for another run. So it's called The Religion Business. It'll be on Amazon early next year. It looks like we're going to have the teaser out here in November. I'm working kind of in a couple narrow paths. So I'm in the production side. I'm one of the producers, but I'm also one of the camera guys. And the reason I originally got involved in this project was the storytelling took the show's creator, Nathan Apfield, to Seattle, and they needed a camera person a relatively short notice. And in my line of work, as you know, in the news business, everything's kind of, you wake up, you don't know what you're doing, and you find out very quickly where you're going. So they hit me up, needed somebody in 48 hours. I was able to fill that void. They then realized that one of my specialties or verticals is chaos and places of unrest or hostile areas. So I've been to different parts of the world, to war zones. I've also been to protests and civil unrest. And there was this component specifically in Texas. The series goes all over the world. It looks like here in a couple of months for the series, I'll be going to Turkey and to Israel to, we don't just look at Texas megachurches. That's just been a big component that my role has played in, because they are some hostile people when you go and ask them questions.
Sure.
And so one of the ones we went to was Kenneth Copeland. And for those of you, if that doesn't spark an image instantly, if you Google him, you'll know him instantly. He hit kind of social media gold here not that long ago because he owns multiple private planes, one of which he bought from Tyler Perry. And Entertainment Tonight, of all publications, was able to corner him at a private airfield where he was getting in his car after flying and question him about it. And what most people would say looks like a demonic response. He got very unhappy about the questions, almost started growling. He was so unhappy, and then made it clear that they should not question him. He considers himself not a pastor. We have others we'll call Pastor Ed Young. He considers himself a prophet and that he is anointed. And he made it very clear that they should not be questioning him. And so we went out there some months ago, earlier in the summer, did some recon, went to one of the services, which was an interesting experience in itself, then went back with the intent to try and dive deeper on some of his past real estate dealings, because he keeps raising capital, significant amounts of capital, millions of dollars, and then not building the project, and then just coming up with a new project that he wants to raise for. And my background in real estate, that's another thing that, is kind of my core competency. And I can understand kind of, hey, how'd we get here? What point should he, if the project was not viable, told his people it wasn't viable? And when was it still possibly just being figured out? And ended up getting trespassed off his property last time when we managed to get his airfield. Went back again to Pastor Ed Young's just a couple of weeks ago, got trespassed. The show's creator got arrested. And it's been a lot more volatile than I expected. I think the public sentiment so far, because one of the benefits if you're creating a documentary and you want to be able to kind of get the public pulse of involving somebody like me in your production, is I have a platform so we can kind of test some stuff out, throw out some things happening and say, see, well, how is the public responding to this? The public response has been really good and in scale. We've gotten now millions of views on some of the stories, just little bits of the story that will ultimately be in the series in full. And, I've dealt with stories where you're dealing with gang or mob or organized crime components. And there may be a couple defectors along the way, but generally those groups are pretty tight knit. This is unique in that these megachurch pastors who have these large productions, they have many people on staff, the amount of them who, while still working for them or have worked for them in the past, are willing to bring us documents, recordings of voice conversations with that pastor discussing intimate details of their business operations, where the money goes, getting tax returns on these people. I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen anything like it. The amount of people willing to come forward with real information who said, I worked there for 5+ years. The last year and a half, I was extremely conflicted. And so I started recording our conversations, and I'm willing to give you those recordings. And I started collecting documents. I'm willing to give you those documents. I've never seen anything like it.
I mean, Steve, you might have to change your hashtag, your @ sign to like chaos creator or something of that nature. It's interesting for a lot of people, like you were saying, who may not know, he's kind of in the same genre as like Jimmy Swaggart, and he kind of came up in that era, right? But he was more late on the opposite end of like when Jimmy Swaggart and all those guys were getting pinched. He still was kind of making his way up through the church, megachurch scene, as I recall, as a younger kid. But it's interesting when you go back and you watch Jimmy Swaggart now, and some of these guys that are now selling survival food is quite interesting. It's quite entertaining. But when we talk about, the state of affairs of what's going on and you're working on these other projects, I was just thinking about what's been going on around here locally. I saw that the guy from the Hellcat, Dodge Charger or Hellcat guy has been seeming to be making the news again. And I guess he was arrested recently. What's interesting to me about the Hellcat guy is like, I mean, is it just a generation of stupid individuals now that like aren't learning their lessons, or is the money so damn good in social media that it just, you got to continue to go? Steve,
I think he is an anomaly. I have spent time with him on a personal level. I went to go and try and actually put a story together on this guy and give him a chance to explain his side. So full disclosure. We went out for a night. I got to meet a lot of the people in his circle. It was an entertaining night. He actually, I think he has something very unique. Before I get into kind of, let's start here and then let's get into the kind of legal side.
Yeah.
I think he does have a unique ability to engage with people. I saw him do crowd work when I was out. He wasn't very recognized. He was wearing a shiesty on that night. And sometimes he would take it up. A lot of people have never seen his face. So it's not like he went around going, I'm the Hellcat guy.
Right.
But he was, the way he worked a crowd, what caught me off guard is that, oh, this guy actually has a star ability. If he really wanted to hone this into a true business, I think he's one of those few who could really do it. To be becoming an influencer, as cliche as that sound, is not as easy as people think. You really have to have something there. Now,
clearly,
since then, he didn't follow through with any of the interview. He wanted to try and get footage that we shot, just given to him. And I said, hey, we can give you stuff, but we really need to finish up the part that I'm already invested in. I've already brought camera people. I've invested time and money into this. And he just wouldn't follow through. And so that was kind of where it sat. And I was okay with it kind of just dropping there because I didn't really know what the story would be, but I was intrigued to do it. Since then, he's got kind of a multitude of different legal issues here. So he's got the car, and that's what most people know him for and know about. Then there is a domestic violence charge, and that was what he was just arrested on there. That was an emphasis push for an old domestic violence charge he had with his mother from months ago, and they had a large warrant out for him on that. Then he's got a third that involves with a previous girlfriend, stalking allegation, and it sounds like also a revenge porn allegation. I haven't gotten a lot of documents on that. There have been some, but a lot's been redacted just to try and keep her name out of the public. He then works, we don't really know what he does. I suspect he works at his mom's nonprofit, which makes it also kind of interesting. And then, as far as kind of how he interacts with the public, he's unapologetic. He feels that, hey, this attention is not a bad thing. So I think for those who think he's unfairly picked on, stop. This is his game. He knows it.
Yeah.
Is the story bigger than it should be? Maybe, but the public has decided that this guy should be in the spotlight. And at least from a pop culture standpoint, if not a truly critical what's going on here standpoint.
He's like the modern day Pacific Northwest, like Fast and the Furious.
Yeah.
As much as that franchise is still hanging on for dear life after all these decades, it's unbelievable to me. Now, as we get through some of these other stories, Steve, has the crime around the Pacific Northwest, what's really going on the beat of the street right now, Seattle wise? I know that there's still a lot going on with 3rd Avenue. Do we feel like that place has become a little, should we say, cliche? I know I saw someone post recently about bringing their family or some friends into town, and he was like, I'm going to take him to the most popular place. Yeah. And he said, I'm going to take him to 3rd Avenue, which was crazy to me because I think everyone from the Pacific Northwest or from anywhere who knows about Seattle says, I'm not going there. I know that people who live in the suburbs say Seattle's dead. I still hear a lot of that. Someone who lives in West Seattle, I mean, the waterfront's fine. You're starting to see more of these automated, little like tin can with the scopes and the 4 cameras and the blue flashing lights. Yeah. You're starting to see more of the Uncle Sam and the spy cameras watching everybody now. Big Brother spending more time, doing surveillance on people than, I guess you would say patrolling the streets. Who's watching those cameras?
Yeah, so a lot of those are privately owned. I find we could get in a whole nother conversation at some point too, just about government surveillance and some of the push for systems like Flock and such to make it to where the police can identify movement of people that they've identified as potential criminals. But anywhere you walk in the city, whether you know it or not, you are probably on anywhere from 1 to 8 cameras at one time. Some are Seattle Department of Transportation, so government, Big Brother.
Right.
Many are Ring. Then there's these trailers that go around that are privately owned, privately funded. They are leased by these businesses. The businesses generally have to go through a fair amount of steps to even get access to the footage. I've done stories in the past where there was one down in Hunts Point, kind of just outside of Federal Way. And there was a fire truck that had been broken into and a bunch of equipment stolen. And it was right by one of these trailers. And I could not get the footage no matter what I did to try and show the public to see if we could identify these people. These companies, it's I wouldn't say it's a sham, but it's not, these trailers I think are more optics than anything. And then they also now, a lot of them now do an audible every, 3 minutes. They remind you that Big Brother's there watching you. So just don't mess around. Third and Pike, which definitely is cliche, is still doing what it's always done. It's a relatively isolated area. I always push back on the Seattle's dead narrative because the numbers just don't show it. I guess it depends on what is dead. Is grunge dead? Yes, grunge has been gone for some time, right? Old school 90s Seattle that a lot of us remember. Yeah, that's gone. And in the 90s, I'm sure there was some era that people were frustrated was gone in Seattle too, right? That's that cyclical motion that always happens. Outside of that, and particular cultural movements, the numbers show Seattle is thriving just as much as it ever has. Yes, there are people who have moved out, and during the pandemic, they found out that they could be remote, and so they moved to the other side of the state, another state altogether, whatever. Multiple people came in to try and take their spot. Housing values show that, the job market shows that, traffic shows that, everything shows that. So is it what we all remember? No, but I also think we somehow glorify what it once was. It's not like this place, if you really want to get into history beyond just the last couple of decades, Seattle's always been kind of a rough place. It was founded as an area, as really a shipping area, and the streets were pretty rough back then. It's continued to do so. It has its ups and downs. Right now, I think people are able to be more aware of it. I certainly contribute to that ecosystem of making sure people are aware of what's going on. So
Sure.
I'm just as guilty as anybody of feeding into that. But I think hopefully people, if they want to actually know what's going on, want to get aware, get into the statistics, get into a better understanding, don't just take it at face value. And this place never, I remember I skipped school back in high school, and it was me and a few friends. We went to Seattle for the day, and our parents found out. And when we didn't know, back then they couldn't call me on my cell phone or something, right? So
Sure.
we had no idea the shitstorm we were coming home to. And so we
Right.
get home in the afternoon or whenever, and our parents have already talked. They figured out somebody had said where we went, and my dad, and this was in like 1998, maybe, was
Mhm.
screaming at me about, you went to Seattle, somebody will come up and just cut you and bleed you out on the street. And I always think about that when people go, oh man, it's not like it used to be. I was like, obviously we skipped to go there. We wanted to be there. It was
Right.
a big place. It was a place people wanted to be. This place you could get stabbed and bled out, man. It's always kind of been that.
It's interesting when you say that, because like when I did this, when I was doing my high school English project back in '97 for my senior year project, and it was called this project we called Helping the Homeless. We went down, we did a whole thing. We recorded with the big old camera. We recorded everything. We got interviews of people. We got homeless people to do interviews with us.
Mhm.
And a lot of them said this, and this stuck to me. And to this day, it's like they said, Seattle's a great place to be. The weather is mild. The services are great here. And this was 97. So that was a long time ago. And it's just continued to be such. And what he said to me was, there are some of us who just want to be left alone,
Yeah.
that you don't want help from anybody. We just want to be our own and do our own thing. And there are others who want to kind of rebuild themselves and go back. And so it just stuck with me throughout all these years and now decades that, and it's crazy to say that this homeless guy that I remember just to the T saying, look, not all of us want help.
Right.
Fast forward, here we are through the pandemic, and it just seems to have to multiply, and it's something that is continuously happening. Obviously, it's like they're moving around, and like even driving down I-5, I saw where was I? I was just by passing Soto on 5 heading south just before the Rainier Brewery. What's coming up through the freeway? Fire.
Yep.
I was like, oh, okay, well, something's going on. Things don't seem to relatively have changed in regards to, you're seeing the city is trying to do their best to clean the city up in regards to move people kind of. I know we saw that during the World Cup or the World, was it All-Star Week, where they kind of cleaned up everything, kind of tidied up. Let's put all our trash somewhere. It's like as kids, remember when you're like cleaning your room, your parents are like,
Push it under the bed. Yeah.
everything underneath the bed. Yes. And so when you think about this, I know that the city is trying to do their best to continue to, clean and put, all the stuff, and, DOT is trying to, cover up paint and spray paint and all the other graffiti and things of that nature. Now, as we continue to see some of these still hot zones of homeless camps, are we seeing a trend right now, like South Park by the South? There was some stuff going on down there. I know there was a huge fire back in the late September, maybe it was August or something like that. Huge fire, some trailers or something burned down. But it's almost like they just let it go. You know what I mean? That it's just a kind of clean up in quotations to let things just kind of like happen on their own? Are we still seeing a lot of crime through that stuff right now with these homeless?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a point where they go, we don't have all the things in place to, whether that be offer assistance, which generally we have enough to offer assistance, but to get people to take assistance. And so since we're not going to do involuntary confinement, things like that, we have to, it's kind of like, all right, we're going to leave it alone over here till it hits a certain point. The jungle, which has been around for forever, really, and we could go into some of the history of Mayor Ed Murray when the jungle was first kind of eradicated, and then all of a sudden, boom, there was homeless everywhere. Everybody thought it exploded. It was around, you just didn't see it. But the jungle just got cleared out again because there was a shooting with multiple victims on a Sunday. It was then decided, and this is in September, it was decided then, okay, we got to clear this place out. There also had been an odor out there of a dead body for some time. And, my background in the first responder world, and for any of you watching, that smell of a dead body is different than anything else, than any other kind of animal. It's in the calciums and stuff we consume. It's just a very different type of odor. And so there was a thought there was a body. And what they ended up finding was a woman inside of a suitcase, wrapped inside those purple bags that they go and leave out there that have the phone number. So you can just call the number and get your trash picked up for free if you're living in an encampment. Wow. She had been kept out there, according to the medical examiner, as far back as June. And the leader of that camp, who is now in custody, his name's Stephen Wynn, is the one accused of killing her. He led that camp and had a hatchet on him most all times. It looks like he used the hatchet to end her life, and then decided to put her in a suitcase and then put it under his framed up structure, not buried, just underneath his framed up structure until they did that sweep. And so, what finally pushed it to sweep time was a shooting, and then another body's found. And so, it's one of the challenges with these is I get the concept. And as I go back to Mayor Ed Murray, we didn't realize the homeless situation was so bad until they decided, he wanted to get more money for homeless outreach. And obviously there's a lot of debate on whether money's what's going to solve this, but that was what he believed would. He couldn't get the public's will. And so he cleared out the jungle, and he said it was to try and cut down on crime. My suspicion is he thought, hey, if I push this out and in front of everybody, they're going to say, okay, now we'll support what you want to do. He still couldn't get the support. And all of a sudden, there's people living in between the North and South Freeway in downtown Seattle. There's people living out on the sidewalk, which we hadn't really seen before. Now we would see panhandlers and stuff.
Right.
Now they didn't have anywhere to go. Now, does that mean it got worse, or does that mean all of a sudden you couldn't look the other way? And that's one of the challenges with these is the jungle's a nice, convenient place to have it over there where nobody really sees it. But then when you have to clear that out, then it goes down into a more populated area. Neither one really solves the problem. It's just a change in tactics at that time.
It's just interesting because when you think about this, two sweeps inside of an area which is, I don't know, half mile long, maybe a mile long, underneath, terrifying. Anybody who's anybody, just if you have an opportunity, I know that there have been many stories out there that have covered this jungle piece, and it's terrifying. It is like another world. It's like almost like I guess I'm looking for the word like underground world. Like it's like night and day. You go in there and you're like, what the hell is this?
Especially in an area that's so concerned about environmental impact. You're not able to use gas leaf blowers.
Yeah.
Which, okay, fine. I'm not trying to go and debate the gas leaf blower debate.
Sure.
But to lay out policy for that and leave this alone for anybody concerned about those other types of environmental impacts, go visit one of these spots. It will blow your mind, the amount of debris, toxic waste, needles, as well as just normal bioorganic trash in there. It is feet deep, and you can sit in these. I wanted to go in and take a photo a couple times because I used to do a lot of outreach in these spots, and I could stand in a spot where through the trees you could see the beautiful skyline of Seattle at night, where the lights are shining and there's just this beautiful overcast, and go while you were sitting in something that you would never let your children near, that you would never want to go in without protective gear on. and yet we pretend to be this such environmentally conscious area, and it's very frustrating to me. I think that, I wish we could get people to see that and go, okay, we need to get behind this. Now, not only do you have human suffering, do we need to find a solution, but the environmental impact, all those things layered on top, we
Right.
need to solve this. It would be of great benefit to this area to get serious about this and figure out what other options can we do. And it's not just housing. Amazon didn't go do this. It's a multitude of things. It's addiction is at the core of this issue. Then sure, housing and other issues along the way to get somebody from the bottom of this problem all the way through to the other side. But I think people just want to say, well, it's just this or it's just that. You're not serious at that point.
For those who have been living downtown, and I know that I saw this recently somewhere, and this one was probably from the mainstream news, but if you've been a part of Second Avenue and we know that there's some hot spots. There was a fantastic Mexican restaurant that had been around for decades, and this family had owned this. I know that it changed hands a few times. I know that it tragically suffered during the pandemic. I know I used to go there to get my tortillas because they would just make them fresh. But Mama's Kitchen, which shut down, turned into again, kind of like the same thing as you're talking, but in a smaller footprint where people were going in to the abandoned building and then basically it turned into a cesspool. I mean, it basically a biohazardous and toxic environment. You cannot, I mean, the place been run down clearly and then being overtaken by squatters. What intel do you have on that spot? And what
on that one specifically, I don't. I believe, though, that building has been marked as Seattle Fire had gone through and identified, I believe, 40-something buildings that were of high concern. If they catch fire, they will watch them burn. Since that list has come out last year, I have been on those when they have caught fire and they watch them burn. They try and keep it from spreading.
Sure.
And that's where I think people don't get the true level of financial impact when these things happen. When you have a spot like that, it's easy to say, well, we only have this much resource to throw at it, or we don't want to authorize money for that. You will pay one way or the other. I don't care how you look, whether that is in loss of revenue from people willing to come and shop in these areas and patronize these areas, whether this is in first response services having to go out repeatedly to address these areas, whether it be from, a scene of violence or a fire burning to the ground. Then there's the cleanup component to these. The layers of money in this is massive. And I think that when they tell us what the numbers are, it's not a complete picture. I don't know that they are intentionally not disclosing as much as it may just be more complicated for them to try and analyze it, but it is massive dollars. Millions of dollars goes into this stuff that does not end up in these budgets that then are left to be approved. When they had come out recently with the homelessness budget and it was a number like we'd never seen before. It was I think 5 or 6 times what it had ever been historically. People freaked. I didn't look through it, so I can't tell you with certainty, but I wonder if some of those things had actually been accounted for in this, saying, hey, wait a minute, we're spending it already. Even if you didn't see it here, it's being spent here, and here. You just don't know it because it's inherently in those operating budgets. But I think it's going to take that to get a real serious solution.
Our guest tonight, Photog Steve, who's been traveling, he's been covering stories. The election's coming up, man. I know we're talking about some things that for those who are listening on terrestrial radio, the election has already happened. For those who are listening to the podcast, who exclusively, if you're listening to the terrestrial radio, you should go to my website, onairmario.com, to subscribe to the podcast so you can get this before it comes out for terrestrial radio. Steve, I know that things are hot right now. Not only just in Washington. Well, Washington seems to be. I will say that this is the most intrigued I've been in decades in regards to since my being able to vote since 96. It is quite interesting because I know that in my voting history, I've gone to the ballot box or gone to the ballot poll. I've, did that multiple years before they went to mail-in ballot. It blows my mind that we are seeing ballot boxes in Vancouver and Portland being burnt, or catching fire or arson or whatever the case may be. How crazy are it for is it for you to like hear about these stories and cover them now?
Yeah, it's been wild. And I'll say for those listening on terrestrial radio, as you said, hope it's over. Hopefully it's over. Hopefully it's over in that we have a defined winner and we are moving forward. I don't know that we will.
Yes.
I don't think it's going to be over for some time, but I'm very curious to see when they finally get a person in custody on that, what the motive will be. This also happened in Arizona around the same time, within 48 hours of Vancouver and Portland, at least within 48 hours. And that person was taken into custody, and it turned out he was just an agent of chaos. He had wanted to get arrested. He thought if he did a federal crime that he would get more time of government housing, if you will. This doesn't have that type of feel to it, so I don't want to minimize it and say it's just somebody out there just creating chaos. But I think we'll get a better understanding then. There's a lot of now. Governor Inslee has activated limited resources with the National Guard that are going into effect, I believe, tomorrow, and are expected to stay in place tomorrow, being Monday, stay in place through Thursday, and then it could be extended from there. I've seen a lot of comments of people saying, "Well, they didn't do that during the Chaz Chop days. Now they are." They did. There was
Sure.
actually National Guard. Yeah, there absolutely was. For those, again, short-term memory, people just want to feel like they're the victim of the circumstance and moment that they're in, and not be realistic about the history. But I think people may be surprised to see what will happen here, because I think, well, this state's so defined, right? We usually kind of always go one way. It's
Sure.
not a very controversial. This is not a swing state by any means, but there is a lot of people who want to make a statement out here. And we've seen it in a lot of other instances, people shutting down the freeway and such. There was a concern yesterday about the freeway getting shut down. That did not materialize, but State Patrol were putting resources together to go address that. I am hoping, I guess I'll put my own opinion on this. I am hoping that this is all just in an abundance of caution and that it's not going to materialize. It will somewhere. I hope it doesn't here. Somewhere across the country, some chaos is going to happen. And I'm sure, as those who are listening to this post-election, how naive we sound here on a Sunday night saying,
Right.
oh, here's what might happen. But, I think I'm hoping it'll be pretty isolated here.
It's interesting because I did on Instagram, and then also on the Tiki Talker. This is what I asked, because someone asked me when I was watching the Husky football game, who do you think is going to be more upset? Is it going to be Democrats because they lost and they're going to be the ones out rioting, or is it going to be Republicans who have voted for Donald Trump and they saw an outcome that wasn't in the favor of them? Obviously, we're talking about a podcast, a radio show that will air with and clearly there'll be some information that'll be, who knows what will actually happen. Will we have a defined winner? Is it going to be a landslide? Because I will tell you right now, from watching on social media, Steve, people in the international district, people who look like they could barely speak English, and this are voting for Trump.
Mm-hmm.
They're voting for Trump. I know that Hispanics typically tend to be more conservative. So to me, it seems like it's pretty defined that this could be a straight landslide. Now, the polls show completely different, and we know how polls are. Are we going to see people in regards to in states with ballot boxes like we did in the past, where they were armed? And in the state of Washington, you don't have to, you can open carry in the state. So I know that there was one time during the pandemic where I was at Chipotle and a guy didn't want to wear his mask. And so he was open carrying. So if someone asked him about his mask, which no one was going to ask him about his mask, because, but in the situation, you got a guy who's carrying, and then you got the guy next to him who has no clue what's going on. And then there's me, waiting. I'm like, well, this could be my last Chipotle bowl. Are we going to see more people like that at the ballot boxes for like intimidation factors? I mean, are you seeing any of that in
I'm sure it's going to happen. I'm hoping, though, I think the most of us really are not interested in participating in those type of activities. The vast majority of us are not interested in participating in those type of activities.
Sure.
But this is a big country, and so it will happen. It will then be amplified. If it happens here locally and I get that story, believe me, I'm going to put the story out. I'm going to amplify and go, hey, here's what's happening here, right? So that's kind of what the role of press and media is to show what's going on out there. I think, we've seen in the past where there's this fear that whichever side loses, that, well, one side's really well armed and the other side isn't. Both sides are certainly capable of a lot of unrest. And we've seen instances, whether, that be from January 6th or that be from other types of civil unrest outside of voting, outside of political cycles. Every side is capable of it. I don't know how many people are really going to be interested in participating in that in scale unless there becomes some sort of a concerted effort, which I'm sure there will be on some point, to say, hey, the election was stolen. That seems to be what really works people up. It's not the loss. If the loss was agreed to and concise, that'd be one thing. But also, when you say landslide, what's even a landslide? You could have the Electoral College be a landslide and the popular vote not be a landslide. So that's where I think people too, you can have, you go, hey, this is a decisive win. This is a decisive win. And it's still the minority of people who voted for it. That right there is a making of a lot of unrest, even though that is a decisive win.
Right. It will be interesting to see what happens. I probably will go live. The one thing that I always think about, and to me, when you talk about the riots and things of that nature, it's interesting to me because it goes back to one individual who no longer is around, who it is his birthday week. William Cooper, who wrote Behold the Pale Horse. And this book has been the controversy of many of those that are out there. This individual had a dislike for, as he called a nuisance of, Alex Jones, and called Art Bell, horrible things and things of that nature. Now, was William Cooper a great individual? No. But what's interesting is that when you talk about some of these individuals like an Alex Jones, like these different groups that have, congregated together to move towards gathering and taking, it was interesting to me how much has been taken out of this book and used over the decades. Something that was written in the 90s. The guy, had some interesting insights to even the 9/11 stuff, but him thinking that, the world is, big government is going to get you and things of that nature. And for those who are out there, this could be one of those situations where if one side believes that this election was stolen from them, maybe it was a popular vote, won, and then clearly the, college electoral said, nope, it's going to go this way. And hopefully that the voting, the electoral college does the right thing in regards to whoever the popular vote is. You'll do the right thing. Just say, okay, they were the winner. The people have spoken. We're going to do our job. Boom, 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 boom. It's not always that easy, but again, this is where a lot of people start to get upset, and like you were saying, they're going to either protest, they're going to show, dislike, be out in the streets. And I know there was some of that during Trump's first inauguration, and I know that, there were a lot of people that were upset. I remember I was in Charleston, people crying during that time. It was 4 years that, when you look back, it was a blur. I remember doing some interesting shows. I remember, doing a COVID show about him, thinking, oh man, this is the beginning of COVID, when they had that big super spreader party, everyone got sick, and at that point, there was a lot of people that could have died, because it was still relatively a newer, element where people were still dying. And obviously they were all taken care of and things of that nature. But will we see, you're going to be on the streets. Do you know where you're going to be on election night? Are you going to be towards the city? Are you going to be near like maybe some of these old 2020 locations? I mean, do we
I
have
would
any?
assume in the city, but it's really going to depend on a lot of intel. So, my line of work, you're working a lot of sources behind the scenes.
Sure.
So it could be down to the Capitol. I don't think will be um, that volatile will be like the governor's race. I mean, Reichert's campaign really didn't seem to get the traction that was necessary. Um,
What, the heroes, not the Green River, heroes not going to win this thing?
he seemed to, I thought he was going to go a bit bigger in the beginning. It just didn't really seem to take off. So I think Ferguson's pretty much got it. Now, there may be people who are not happy with that, but I don't think it's going to be this contentious outcome that's going to work people up. And I don't think that state governor races usually amplify people to that
Sure.
level.
Right.
So I don't know that it ends up in the Capitol. I think I even wonder if it'll be the night of. I feel like it's going to be day after. I think as this thing continues to build, and as the candidate, specifically one candidate, is going to be, it's going to use that pulpit pretty heavily in the hours after, and then I think that that's going to really work a lot of people up, and that's what I think my biggest concern is. When you get that, and let's say that candidate wins, and we look at pulling back on Ukraine, doubling down on what's happening in the Middle East. There's going to be things for people to attach to. It's not going to be over just because there was that person did or didn't win. But if that person does win, we will have waves and waves and waves of this like we haven't seen in a long time and may have never seen before.
What's interesting too is that, I had heard that there are people that are going to vote strike, like not vote because they don't, because of the Palestinian and Israeli conflict right now,
Yeah.
war, conflict, whatever you want to call it. And I'm like, how about do your public service, go out, vote first, and then we can deal with this and say, go vote so that you can then go complain to your elected official and say, hey, by the way, that's what we do as Americans. Remember, and I know that most of the stations that we're on are pretty conservative. They're smart. I'm not saying that, liberals are not smart, but be educated about what you're doing. Like, do your job. Your job is to vote for individuals to work for you. That's what we elect these people to do. They have a job. You want to protest, do a hunger strike for God's sakes, but make sure you get your vote out so then you can say, hey, by the way, dummy, go fix this thing,
Right.
however that may be for you. And it's not that simple. This is like, that whole situation over there, the conflict. I don't care if you're religious or not religious. It's a religious war about two individuals fighting about land that has been promised to them, that has been written in a book, one in one version and the second in another. And I'll have a link to a theologian who speaks highly or gives a great clarity on what is going on for those who simply don't believe in a higher power or believe in that stuff. And if you don't believe in a higher power like that, then and that's fine. But that's what they're fighting about. They're fighting about promised land to them. So
I think that too, when I spent time out there talking to people on both sides of it, it's easy a lot of times I know 9/11 is used as an example here, but I think it's the best example we have of something that people can remember and relate to.
Sure.
For a lot of us who lived through that, obviously it was one of the biggest things that ever happened in our life. And some of us maybe distantly knew somebody out there. Some of us did have direct family or were directly involved, knew somebody whose life was ended or forever altered out there. But that wasn't the majority of us. The majority of us were just experiencing one of the biggest events that ever happened and so on. When you go out to that area, every single person you talk to not only has a belief, not only has their historical version of it, but also has first person account of how it's affected them directly. Family that they knew whose lives were ended by something in this conflict over the last decade, 2 decades. Their land was taken over the last decade, 2 decades and that goes from West Bank as well as Gaza. And so it wasn't like people saying, oh, this is what I believe because I've watched it going, no, my aunt, my uncle, my brother, my sister, my mother, my father all had this exact experience that became a formative experience for me in my life. And so then to go out there and say, well, here's what you need to do to solve it. It's just, that's not how humans work. And it's not about right or wrong. That's how ingrained it is on both sides of this thing. Where in a lot of the stories that I would hear, we're not like, oh, we just felt we were wronged. It's no, I have somebody who is in my family who's no longer on this earth because of what I believe the other side is doing.
Yeah.
And it was not in the last, now we're a year and a month out. I'm talking going back years previous to that, decades previous to that. And it goes on long before any of that.
It is so sad to see human life extinguished over a conflict in regards to beliefs, and especially religious beliefs, which it can go back to the what is it, the Protestants and the Catholics are like, why are you guys fighting over it? Like, you know what I mean? It's like crazy for those who may not understand, who may be a part of this. But go back to like when Catholics and Protestants were fighting in Israel, but in Ireland. It's like people like forget about these things. Like religion is ingrained in a lot of people, and I know that there are a lot of people who don't believe in religion, and that's okay. You're allowed to have that belief, but again, Steve, you're talking about firsthand accounts of people who are like, damn, I've been, this sucks. Like,
well, and over here we have hundreds of millions of people. So, you're not going to have something that directly affects hundreds of millions of people's lives in the same way. Over there, Israel itself is the size of New Jersey.
yeah,
You can be from one end of the country and the other in a matter of hours. They are a huge player in the world stage, but this is not a large population of people. So a large, very large percentage, if not every single person, can be directly affected by something like this. And then it becomes that visceral feeling, and really nothing matters at that point. I know this because this is how it affected me, and I'm not going to budge from this.
Our guest tonight, Photog Steve, the state of Washington. Steve, I know there's so much been going on. Are we talking an uptick? I mean, I know that everyone right now is. You still see it on every stupid platform. And I say stupid because I don't want to name them all, but all these different viewing platforms of movies and documentaries and docuseries of crime nets and podcast this and true crime that and social experiment and serial killer Ted Bundy this and blah 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 that, and we all know, hey, I mean, we take it, I don't know, maybe not I wouldn't say a badge of honor, but I know per capita that Washington seems to have produced a lot of serial killers.
Yeah.
We're not looking at an uptick. I mean, is serial killers thing a thing of the past now that social media is out there? And
I think it's definitely a lot harder for them to operate for years on end. I think it's easy to say, well, it's because of our gloomy,
sure,
weather patterns and so on. I think there's a couple things that were unique out here. We have a lot of rural, and I don't mean rural like pasture. I mean, forest land out here.
yeah,
You can be in a very heavily populated area, commit the beginnings of your crime, and then within an hour be in a very desolate area to get rid of the evidence. And I think that makes this area unique than when you get to other parts like LA, and you really have to go a ways to get rid of. I think that's one of the things that the Gary Ridgeways of the world were able to operate out here because of the landscape out here. Go ahead.
Recently, I guess Gary decided to make, I don't know that he wanted to, but he made an appearance here in King County recently, doing some, I don't know if it's visits, if he was here for vacation from the state penitentiary. Do we have any intel on what his whereabouts and what he was doing?
So I was working that when he came out here. We realized he got transferred that morning, and then we're out trying to find him. We had areas that they were taking him. It sounds like there was a belief that he might be willing to disclose some more locations of bodies. The bodies have not all been found.
Sure. Yeah, right.
He himself says there are more. He just can't remember where they are, but he seems to have these epiphanies every so many years. And there's an interesting relationship between him and Dave Reichert. And what Dave Reichert running for governor, there was some thought that sometimes you find in these the investigators chasing and the person accused of the crimes, there becomes this odd kinship between them, especially years later.
Sure.
And there was an insinuation that maybe he was going to drop a few more bodies and that would help Reichert's campaign. It didn't seem to materialize, but they did go out and they looked for more. I went and drove a lot of those areas that they were going to be on, and I'm younger than he is, and so I don't have the amount of decades that he was out driving around getting rid of bodies that I do. And I was thinking, I don't know how you come out all these years later, go for a ride, and first off, not just be blown away at the world around you. Second, recognize much of anything when you get out on those roads where so much has changed.
Especially over the decades. I mean, growing up in the 80s, I mean, I lived just by the Green River up in really close. And I remember the first body, we were going to a Mexican restaurant, which was on the other side of the Green River Bridge by the by Riverbend or whatever the golf course is. And we were driving home and we saw them pulling out the first bodies or the first body, back then. And man, to this day, I remember being a kid getting on the bus and the bus driver playing, whatever it was, the radio, and you'd hear da da da, the news ticker, and the Green River has struck again. They have another body found over over by the Green River Gorge. And as a kid, I had no clue because I had no information. I was just I just thought the Green River Killer was just killing anybody at random. Right. I didn't know he wasn't looking for, young boys. But he was going after young prostitutes or his victims on a larger scale, which is terrifying to think this, and very sad that there is a population of individuals, women, who in the 80s would go missing, either had gone into the night, ladies of the night, it became sex workers, or maybe they weren't even sex workers, but they were hitchhiking and then became a victim.
And he had gone through a lot of steps. Couple quick facts about him. So every time he would go get rid of a body, he would get new tires on his truck and then make sure that the other tires had been destroyed. He was known also to keep the bodies on the back of the truck for days after. He would go to the Kenworth plant in Renton, then leave on his lunch, use those bodies for his own gratification, go back to work, and then get rid of them later. Forensics took years to catch up. Eventually, the reason it was even figured out was that job in Kenworth. They used a very specific spray paint, of a chemical in a paint that if you were to have that on you, which was on the victims, it could only come from that one place and maybe a manufacturer behind that. So, that in itself says if he had tried this years later, I don't think it would have been as prolific. They probably would have found that sooner. That stuff takes time to catch up. I'm working an ICAC story now where, stuff is caught up. They're able to catch them later. These things move at a much faster pace now. So, what makes a serial killer? Are there people out there wanting to be serial killers? Probably. But I think that as you analyze these people who do it, they break that threshold, they're successful, they do it again, they're successful, and then it becomes something. I don't think that people like Gary Ridgway intended to go and put out those kinds of numbers, but they evolved as they continue to get away with it. So there's probably still people around us who are absolutely capable of it, but hopefully forensic science and DNA has helped keep that at bay.
When we talk about serial killers, high crimes, things of that nature, obviously Ted Bundy was another one, and the list can go on for forever. But we're not seeing an uptick. Are we seeing sex trafficking stories going on right now? Are we seeing an uptick of this go on? I know that there's still that sludge of 99, and I say sludge, but that area where I don't want to call it Skid Road, but I don't want to call it Candy Cane Lane either, but stripper, hooker, they're not strippers. I know sex workers, things of that nature. Why is that still even a thing? I know that there are some laws that have been changed. Are they going to really effectively start going after these young ladies?
They seem to be posturing too, but it hasn't really gone on. It hasn't come in. And there's been a bit of a transition over the last 5 years or so. So in the past, there was generally going to be sex workers out there working on their own. And then there were some with pimps as well. Pimps have really got a stronghold out there. And so if you're not working with one, you're going to now be at risk from others until you align with one. And the makeup of the girls, and I don't mean makeup, just the physical makeup of them has changed. The brazenness has changed in recent years. I think we're a long ways away from seeing any shift in that happening. There has been definitely a shift in public sentiment too, from as far as a tolerance of it. And I don't even know that it's that they're okay with it as it is, but would be okay with it if there was a legal capacity available for it. So there's obviously been a shift in culture on that too.
It's crazy because when you think about it, I know that they're still, you see these videos of, these pimp wars where they're fighting in like straight up, like it almost looks like, I don't even want to call it South Central, like 90s gang war. You know what I mean? You hear the car skidding out and you hear da, 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 I'm like, what am I watching? And I know I've seen tons of surveillance cameras showing these I don't know, they're pimp wars or what you want to call them. But how terrifying is it to see that nothing is really being done in regards to like, hey, let's patrol this a little bit more and let's get some, boots on ground.
I think there's a difference too. There's pimps who came in as pimps, and then there's gang members trying to be pimps. And a lot of the more traditional pimps are not really interested in going out there shooting up blocks and getting into wars and so on. They're in it to just try and make money and continue to try and push the girls to get more money. Now that the gang violence has started to expand and is now getting into that, it's gotten a lot more violent. Now, whether or not that is good or bad, I don't want to say like, oh, we just need to get back to old traditional pimps. That's not what I'm saying, but that's kind of where that transition is coming from, is that evolution is coming from. So a lot of the guys that are out there participating, there are pimps who've been out there for a long time, seem to stay out of jail, stay off of law enforcement radar. And then there's some who are out there just getting into it and shooting the place up and creating a lot of chaos and getting a lot more attention than the other ones want. And that's what's, I think, kind of amplified. A lot of that footage that you've probably seen online is footage I've gotten because I'm the only person who has a feed to all the SDOT cameras, and we have servers that grab all of that. So we get it and then put that out just to try and bring some level of awareness to it. But, through public sentiment changing, lack of resources on the law enforcement side, there's some wild stuff going on in SPD right now, just with their payroll system that has them looking at some new staff issues that the news has not picked up on yet. I just don't see there being much change happening anytime soon in it.
I know you had been working a couple stories that gentleman who is now unalive, who pulled out the gun in Tukwila, who was going to meet, he was going to meet a woman's two daughters or whatever and have his way with them. And clearly when he pulled out the gun, they really, they definitely unloaded. They made sure that they left no witnesses for that.
This is very true.
Are we seeing more of these types of crimes going on right now? Internet crimes, where we're seeing these types of things be more of a. I mean, it's almost like it's out of sight, out of mind. No one really talks about it, and I know that you've brought it to the forefront, Steve. Photog 81, if you want to follow him and all the stuff that he's got going on. Steve, let's talk about this. I know it's not fun. It's not fun. It's not sexy. And I know that you've done a really good job to bring awareness to what is a very sensitive subject in regards to some very horrific things that have happened or that are happening out there that aren't being brought to the mainstream media attention, or they're not covering it, or they're not doing. I'm not saying that they're not covering it. Maybe they just don't have the resources. I don't know what's going on. I don't work at the TV stations. So with you doing your due diligence to have the ability to spend more time, as you have said, to investigate these stories, what's going on right now with some of these stories?
So yeah, the numbers are up. Let's start there. So the numbers are up, but it hasn't been a very recent spike. As much as social media has made more people available who can be victimized, those same people who, when we were growing up and you were told about stranger danger and such, you didn't really hear of it actually happening. You just heard that it could happen, and not to talk to strangers.
Right.
It's evolved so much now the amount of potential victims and the amount of children who have been victimized and then continue to live their life. I don't know if there would be a way to go back to our generation and find out how many victims there truly were that just never recorded it, or
Yeah.
I'm sorry, reported it. But the two things now that you have those people who used to be, and I'm talking about the suspects, they're isolated. They're in their basement. They're off the radar committing these acts. Now they have community that they can go reach out to through chat groups, and they have file sharing sites they can go to and sharpen their skills. And a lot of them, I have found out, I didn't know this, but a lot follow work of people like me. And so there is a real responsibility of people who want to go and actually report on this stuff to not overly disclose the ways and means of how they're being caught. There's a task force called ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children. This is a funded program, funded by money that goes to law enforcement, but they also rely heavily on private donation. And the stations, why they do or don't report on this stuff, I can't really say. I can tell you some big challenges with reporting on it. It's extremely graphic. So how can you tell the story properly and not, either one, if you're on social media, just trigger the guideline issues, or two, go so much that you almost desensitize the public to it. That can be a big concern. As you start at the beginning, it's so much, and you hear it so much, it starts to soften. I don't want to do that either. I also don't want to give out the ways and means. I also do not want to ever identify a victim. I get a lot of these that come in where it's a family member, and it could even be somewhat of a distant family member, but it's a family member. And I get a lot of people hitting me up saying, hey, I know somebody who did this, and I would really like the story out. But the victim is still is not 18, nowhere near 18. And this is somebody who they're related to. How can I tell that story and do it properly and not potentially out them? And I've even had some say, well, this will be good for them to know that there's nothing to be ashamed of. I'm not interested in making a decision for an 8, 9, 10, 12, 13-year-old child of what is best for them long-term in putting their story out there. And so those types of things start to weigh into this, of what stories we can tell or not. The ones that I generally tell are the ones where the suspect has already admitted on some level what they've done, or if not fully admitted. The ones that are generally more brazen, because I think the public needs to know for a couple of reasons. One, I think there's this feeling that this just goes on and there's no consequence for it. There are real consequences for it. And there are very dedicated professionals out there working in this space day in and day out, doing work that you could not imagine the amount of emotional stress that comes with that. Every time they get a suspect in custody, and this person has this war chest, if you will, or hard drives of stuff, they have to review every single thing in that. And they have to review it in detail to find out, number one, there's a lot of this content that has been created over the years that continues to recirculate. There's new content that goes out, and they need to try and identify these victims, find out if these are new victims that have never been in the ecosystem before. And a lot of this stuff is extremely methodical. There are parents doing this to their children and then documenting the entire process of it, because there's value in that community of people wanting to watch a child be broken from the start over the weeks following, and that change in that child's eye contact and the way they interact with the world. This is very dark stuff. And so I think that the world needs to know that this goes on. I think they need to know that there's a group that they can support if they want it to go on. And I think the professionals who are doing this work, making sure that they can see that the world does appreciate what they're doing. There's good things in that, but there's a lot of responsibility that comes with this that's much different than the normal overnight homicide stuff.
We'll put a link to it. You said it was ICAC?
ICAC, that's right. Internet Crimes Against Children. And it's a multi-agency task force, local law enforcement to county. They all kind of culminate under this, and they're the ones who handle those specifically.
So we'll put a link in the podcast if you don't know where it's at, and you want to support and you want to donate. I'm sure they could use all the resources and money, yes, and maybe that is available that you may have, and you're like, you know what, I want to make a donation to something. This is definitely a great thing. What's interesting to me, Steve, and I know as we talked about this, you had There was a story that you covered about a young lady who was a dancer who was murdered. And I think that she was involved with an individual, an older gentleman who I believe maybe they had some type of relationship, if it was, you know, for hire, or if it was, some type of, I don't know, whatever the relationship was. It seemed to me a relationship that had ended wrongly.
Mhm.
Do we have any updates on that story?
It still continues to go in the court process. So a lot of times I get, people hit me up going, "Hey, we want follow up on this." At this point, once it goes past charging and it's down that, it can take years for this stuff to go together. He does seem to have had some financial resources, so he can continue to drag this out. He's in custody. He's not getting out of custody anytime soon. He seems determined to torch whatever financial legacy he could have left his kids on legal expenses for a case I don't know that he will ever win.
Have a leg to stand on,
But
yeah.
he seems determined to do so, and in our legal system, you have the right to do that. The young lady, her name was Lilia, and it was a really sad story in that it sounds like there was some level of professional relationship to begin with, in that an exchange of money for a relationship, but it seemed to transition over time from that. But I think he wanted more from her than she was willing to give. And the way it appears is when she was no longer willing to give it, that he couldn't handle that. And it was just a very bizarre case and how it came together, how he then was in the home for some time before reaching. Instead of calling 911, he called an attorney. It appears he just Googled an attorney. He didn't have an attorney on standby, which I was kind of surprised given his financial stature and his business ties that he didn't have somebody he could go to. But he then gets an attorney in place and has continued down this path. I'm curious to see as we get closer to trial what their argument's going to be. At this point, it's really just been, we don't know what happened, and you, the law enforcement, certainly can't figure out what happened based on us just trying to discredit you. So how do you know it was him? Obviously, you got to get a little bit more of that by the time you get to trial.
So much going on out there right now, Steve. Are there any stories that you're able to share that you're working on that maybe you want to give an insight to listeners who may be listening on terrestrial radio or on the stream, on a podcast? Something that you're like, hey, this is something that's coming up that maybe people should be looking for.
Yeah, so we're almost done with the Zarel Blue piece. Zarel Blue is somebody from it's kind of more Pierce County area who was a community organizer, gaining a bit of social media clout, but has a long list of women who say that he was assaulted them, stalked them, sexually assaulted them, and just generally ruined their lives for years after trying to break off relationships with them. This one's taken a while because we've actually done, victim impact interviews as well. There's going to be some ICAC stories this week. There is a man who went to a dollar store. I think it's a dollar store or cash, some sort of like a dollar store type place in Kent off Pack Highway. And for lack of a better term, went into the store, found a 6-year-old in the toy aisle and finished on that 6-year-old and then left the store. And for those wondering what I mean by that, I'm meaning the thing you're thinking that sounds terrible.
Terrible.
And then that went into cold case. And now years later, through DNA linking him through other cases, he's now been arrested.
Good.
He's, I believe, going to plead not guilty. So we'll frame it as that, innocent until proven guilty. But DNA doesn't lie. But it's an interesting one that generally these types of things, I talked earlier about how there's this, the content that then becomes part of the ecosystem and they have to figure out, is this new victim or old victim? This was one where they managed to get him years later. And he was a Joint Base Lewis McCord soldier as well. Another one in ICAC, gentleman here in Kent. The reason he stuck out, so he's in his 50s. He gets a knock at the door at 6 a.m. Like most of these people who get hit by ICAC, that's how it goes down. Is you'll get a knock at about 6 a.m. You'll open it up, and there'll be 6 detectives plus some local law enforcement out there who want to come in and have a conversation. And at that point, they know everything about you, everything. They know stuff about you you've probably forgotten in the last 5 years if it's anywhere in your digital footprint. And they sit down with him. He had been consuming large amounts of what's called CSAM, which is another way of saying child porn, because I think the term child porn has kind of been phased out because there's, they don't want to. Pornography itself can have willing participants. This is not that. So what's different with him is he thinks it should be legal. He thinks that they are out of their minds to come and try and intervene. He thinks that these children from ages 5 to 10 enjoy it, and that it's unfortunate that law enforcement is trying to intervene on this. So we'll be doing a story on him as well.
These are stories that are not typically in the public news, Steve. These stories are horrific. These stories are even ear-piercing to hear for the first time of, being a parent. It's wild because I think most of us who live our normal lives have no clue. It's like, just like as we were talking about the jungle, it's like we live in this world. We just, if it's not in my lane, I'm kind of like, and that's cool. If you stay in your lane, you're doing your thing, that's fine. It is our job to, sometimes not everything's a conspiracy. I'll tell you that, but
Sure.
It is our job to make sure that we bring to light some of these horrific stories so that if someone has any type of information, two of these stories, they can help others get help. If you're a victim and you need help, I'm trying to look up the hotline now. I don't recall it off the top of my head, but we will have links to, a domestic hotline if you need it. If you've had issues, you need counseling, we'll put that in there. The trauma that some of these individuals go through, these are life altering types of situations. But what made me think about what you were just saying about these individuals, these suspects, these individuals these stories seem to have an interesting take to me. And it's not just been one, it's not been two, but it's been a few, Steve, that are like, it seems to be that they're military based.
Sure.
Do we feel that maybe that there is not a good transition out of the military, that that obviously they train these individuals to be machines, to be whatever, war killers, however you want to paint that, but not to have a transition to be able to provide these individuals. And God bless them for serving our country, because I don't want to diminish any of that. But for those who are out there, are we talking about individuals that are just so messed up some of these individuals are like decorated military people? Like, what is going on out there, Steve? Like, I'm asking you because it's wild to me. Like, you're like, what? Like, I can't fathom this.
So I think a couple things, let's kind of set some groundwork here. So number one, what I have found in most of these that I have gone through, when the suspect goes ahead and decides to open up and say, yes, I've done this and it's been a problem, most of them will then acknowledge that this was a desire they've had for a very long time. It may have been a desire that they fought when they were younger, and younger's relative, right? But when you hit a certain point. And so I don't know that this somehow something happens in their life and they then turn to this. I think it's something that's that's much more ingrained. Statistically, I don't have any statistics to back whether or not military is higher or lower. A lot that I get, as I mentioned earlier, that I don't do the story on, are when it's people abusing family loved ones. I have stacks of those, absolute stacks. And I pass on them because I don't know how to tell that story without harming the victim. When you get to coaches, I have a coach from Sumner High School who will be doing this week. I don't think he has any military background. He has a lot of access to the boys that he was coaching. I've got one recently that I did in Renton that I'll be doing another one, a high school teacher there. There's a lot of teachers and coaches and pastors that seem to be in that. I don't know what that villain arc is for them. Do they get into that line of work because there's some other level of attraction? Do they get into that line of work because they think that they'll be good at it, and how this then fits in? I've seen it in the youth pastor world more than I would have expected. Again, where you have people, I find youth pastor different. Same thing even with coaches. Most people become a teacher because it's an early on plan when they're in school, that they then want to get into that, because you have to go through college, you have to do all those things.
Sure.
Some of the other jobs you can decide in your 30s, I just want to do that, and in 6 months I could probably be doing that. I don't need to get a master's degree. So I don't know what that story arc looks like. I have talked to some of the ICAC detectives out there saying, what are some of the excuses that these generally men give? And some of them will say, well, this wasn't something I really wanted. I was looking for something different. I wasn't really looking for that, but it was an evolution. I was getting online. I was looking for something crazier. The stuff that I used to like that was nowhere in this realm was no longer doing it for me. And then over years, I got to that. And then there are others who make it clear, like, no, as early on as a teenager, this was something I wanted. And then as the internet was able to feed it to me, it got worse and worse and worse. So there's a lot of psychology in it. There's a lot that get abused and then become abusers later. So I've just started in this particular type of story in the last year, and so I'm trying to go down that path to get more educated and also not end up on a list when I'm getting online trying to understand this stuff more, because there is, you want to go through and find, okay, what are case studies and so on, and then there's a story I'll probably do in a bit where there was a girl who was a local sheriff's deputy's daughter. And the reason this one sticks out, I mentioned earlier about parents who then abuse their children and document that process for them deciding this is what they're going to do to them, kind of what those following weeks and months look like. And this person contributed a large amount to that ecosystem. And the man in Kent actually was really into that story. And this story goes back a couple decades, and he had viewed a lot of that. And I've tried to go and understand that story more, but so quickly, because I know her name and a couple things about, I can go to just Google that and look for articles written about it.
Yeah.
Within 30 seconds, you can be to the video. It's not as hidden as you would think. And so there's part of me that goes, I don't want to go down that path, because then you do end up on the radar of stuff. But it's like, I want to be able to understand that story more, understand the father, what the father was charged, but to be able to go and look that up and to so quickly end up in a place you could actually view the video was shocking to me.
Our guest tonight, Photog Steve, 81, who is all over social media, but a lot of his work you can find on socials. It's on TikTok. It's on, right? Still on TikTok,
yeah.
YouTube, Instagram. For those who, frequent the Instagrammer, that's where I find most of Steve's stuff, because that's where I spend most of my time doom scrolling through the social media.
We also post all the documents, all the investigation documents on RIFC, which is RYFFC. So it's kind of like it's another version of Twitter. So for those who want to see the work, I post all the documents I pull the story from.
And that's free for people to check out.
And
that's what's great too. We'll post that in the podcast. Steve, any last minute things before we go? I know we spent a lot of time just kind of go over in so many different avenues and different things. I know the election has come and gone for those who are listening on terrestrial radio, but for those who are listening to the podcast, we're gonna try and get this turned around so fast so that it's gonna be like Steve. I mean, I will be interested to see. Either I'm going to turn on my TV, come home, and I'm going to be like, okay, I got to do a show.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to be like, oh, there's nothing to do. There's really nothing to kind of cover in regards to that. And that's really when the conspiracies really start.
Yeah.
Think about it, Steve. Why can't I think of the QAnons? I feel like they will turn on a switch on election day if something tragic doesn't go their way. And I don't know that there's so much, and that when I talk about the QAnons, and I'm not saying that it's interesting to me because watching them and doing some research on them, they are very much, if you have not read the book, Behold the Pale Horse, it is very much a play out of William Cooper's Behold the Pale Horse. I've read the book. I've done my research on it. He's a very interesting individual. He's very much one who had believed that the government was trying to make it, was trying to say that the government was coming after him. They will come after you. You will report to these camps. That's why the post office, these are things that he would say in this book. This is why the freeways were invented, so that you could go, that they could interchange and move people through these different camps, which you would go to your local post office. It is wild, Steve, that this is a book that people were reading, and which was so interesting to me is that during the pandemic that really had played a lot into it. So we'll see if that will play into the election for the 2024 election. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays
It's going
out.
to be a wild week. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to getting to some sort of conclusion.
Yeah, me too. I am too. Although I didn't put any money on the election either, because I was like, I don't know that I feel good about betting on my politicians. I did, the joke that I do not say anymore is vote early, vote often. And now that can be taken out of context.
Oh yeah.
And we're like, oh, he's telling everyone to get extra ballots now, And that's not the case by any means, but it's so interesting to see, you're watching a ton of social media platforms being pushed out there on all these different types of people going to the polls where they can vote early, and the touch screens, which is wild to me to see. And hopefully one day it will be a universal platform so that everyone can vote the same way. Seems really silly to me, but seems like that should be an easy thing, but who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. As long as once there's a wire attached to it, I don't know. At least in this day and age, that's going to be difficult to do and not have somebody be able to tap in.
Well, very true. So maybe it goes back to the old school when you were taking the ASVAB test or these.
Yep, the hanging chad.
Well, there's that too. Yeah, the hanging chad. But just color in the bubble with your pencil or your 2.0 pen or whatever the hell it is these days. Steve, again, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us this evening. It's such a pleasure to hang out, to chat, to have a good conversation with you. There's some crazy, scary stuff going on out there. For those who want to be able to donate, you want to follow Steve, all of his stuff is available on his Instagram. You can find all of his links at Photog Steve 81. If you do not follow him, please do. His content is phenomenal. I have to say, man, you are like the Dan Rathers, the young Dan Rather, the young Peter Jennings out here on the pavement doing stories without a political lean. And we know that nowadays everybody's got some type of agenda, and everyone's pointing to say these media outlets have a lean somewhere. So it again, we appreciate what you do, Steve. I know that it's not easy. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us this evening.
Thanks for having me on, and I'm looking forward to doing it again soon.
From the Pacific Northwest, as we wrap things up, I want to thank our guest tonight, Steve, Photog Steve 81. If you're not following him on Instagram, please do so. For my entire staff, Mark Christopher, Jeff Jens, and Sophia Magana, be sure to look up at the sky because you never know what you might see. Good night.
The Northwest home for paranormal. You're listening to U.S. Phenomenon with your host, Mario Magana.